Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and with me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, who's also host of RT's talk show Crosstalk. Last week, there was an assassination in Iran. One of their top nuclear scientists, his name is Mohsen Fakhizadeh. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Now, so far, no one has claimed responsibility, neither Israel, nor the United States, nor Saudi Arabia. And Iran has put out a number of different versions of what happened. We've had the idea there was an ambush and a team of assassins shot him. We also had a version in which he was assassinated remotely. The standard interpretation, at least as far as the media and commentators are concerned, that Israel was behind this, the idea being to prevent an incoming Biden administration from rejoining the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, because Iran is likely to retaliate, and this will put the United States in an embarrassing position, and hardly in a not exactly the good time to return to an agreement with a country that's doing nasty things.
And if I can add there, it puts Tehran in a difficult position, because if they don't react, that means the perpetrator of this can get away with it with impunity.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think that where I differ with that interpretation is that, first of all, I don't believe that the Biden administration had any intention of returning to the JCPOA. I don't think it's on the agenda.
I think rhetorically they
haven't done that. They haven't even done that. Biden has only said we will rejoin if the Iran comes into compliance. Iran is not just simply going to come into compliance without the United States lifting sanctions. The United States isn't going to lift sanctions, so it's somewhat moot. Biden isn't going to want to antagonize the very powerful Israel lobby in the United States. He doesn't want to antagonize Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states. There isn't any real upside for Biden to return to the JCPOA. Yes, it was Obama's agreement, but that's Obama's problem. It's not Biden, it's the Biden administration. So I don't think that there's any real upside for him. I think that it's much more along the lines of what you just suggested. It's a way of humiliating Iran. Iran is being shown to be powerless. Powerless in the fact that an assassination took place on Iranian soil. If it was a hit team, then it shows Iranian security to be extraordinarily lax. And Iran is actually being shown to be a paper tiger. It's unable to respond in any effective way without provoking a massive attack against Iran. So I think it's much more about humiliating Iran rather than thinking in terms of the JCPOA. All right, what do you think, Peter?
Well, we can also just one extra detail that we can throw in there. You're right, there are multiple versions of what happened with this assassination, but we can't discount the role of the MEK also.
Right. That's one of the versions.
They may have been the conduit. They have been involved. Yeah, they've been involved in domestic terrorism inside of Tehran. Others make claims that they were behind certain riots and social misinformation. That's very much up their alley here. And such notables as Rudolph Giuliani, a big supporter of this terrorist group. It used to be called a terrorist group until I guess it was Secretary Clinton got them off the terror list, and then they all got into bed with them and allowed them to continue their mischievous behavior. What I think is interesting here is that I'm going to put the Iran deal completely aside, because I don't think it has anything to do with this here. And I tend to agree with you. This is a rhetorical, we get into this ridiculous thing that Trump started doing, is to get to overturn everything Obama did. And now you have these people coming in to power potentially in January. They want to undo everything that Trump did, which of course is stupid. It's this childish behavior. Obama did did some good things. Trump did some good things. Obama did some very bad things. Trump was basically inept in other things. Okay, so I mean, for me, it's not 50-50. What I do think is this: the whole point of this assassination is that to ensure that there is no dialogue between Washington and Tehran in a potential new administration. That's what it's about. It's not about Iran's nuclear program. They don't have one, okay? I mean, even some really smart people over the last few days have been reading and listening to reports, and they all go back to this default position. The IAEA says that they're not doing anything, okay? Oh, what about their stockpile of uranium? They can't export it because of the sanctions, okay? It went to Russia. But then the sanctions came in. So, I mean, what do you expect them to do? Eat it? Okay? Burn it? I mean, it's just ridiculous. This hit F1, you know, they're looking for a bomb, and there's no evidence of it. But I think there is very strong evidence here is that the forces in the Gulf, obviously Saudi Arabia, obviously Israel, doesn't want a potential Biden administration even to think about talking to Tehran. And that's what's really in play here. The assassination itself is appalling. It's against international law. It is a violation of Iran's sovereignty. But more than anything else, it's not because of something that Iran is doing now. It's a warning against the Biden administration, what they might do when they come to power. And that's a very insidious scenario I'm putting up, but I think I'm pretty much right. Okay,
Yeah,
it's nothing about what they're doing now.
Right, but I think that's right. But I think that's why it goes back to the issue of humiliating Iran.
Sure.
But remember, the reason why Obama and the other countries joined the JCPOA is that unless they did so, they were afraid that Iran would be in a position to be a serious nuclear power. In other words, that Iran had some leverage. It said that, okay, we will bring our uranium enrichment program to an end in return for the lifting of sanctions, and we will adhere to this agreement. So Iran had leverage. The problem with what's happening now is that Iran is actually losing its leverage. They killed their top nuclear scientists. So that really brings into question, will Iran be able to continue with its nuclear enrichment program? Because if it won't, or if the next man, whoever takes over, their enrichment program is also assassinated, then Iran loses its leverage, and the Europeans will say, well, why do we need to bother? Well, let's keep the sanctions in place. Iran doesn't pose any kind of a long-term threat because it's not in any position to continue with its enrichment program. So that's why I think what's really behind this is just this an attempt to humiliate and to diminish Iran as a serious.
I'm not going to strongly disagree with you. However, given the history of Iran dealing with the hostile outside world, particularly the West, they over the last 40 years, they will continue to soldier on, as it were. Okay, so I don't think killing the scientists is going to deter them one bit. Okay,
Yes, but
I mean, they're going to just continue to do what they're doing.
But I agree with you about that. But that comes less than a year after the assassination of Soleimani. And that was a very big deal. And Iran essentially did very little in return. I mean, they talked very big, we're going to hit back and we're going to take our revenge and it'll be horrific. But they weren't able to do it. I mean, it was a symbolic retaliation. They really, America just said, okay, is that the best you can do? Fine. We'll leave it at that. So that's 2 humiliations within 12 months. And this is even worse because this was really on Iranian soil. So if it was a team of assassins that actually entered Iran and managed to leave Iran, then it really brings into question.
Well, I think that might explain.
Really going on?
I think that probably what explains the lack of clarity on exactly what the events were, because basically the Iranians don't want to show their cards about their the ability to surveil their own sovereignty. The way I look at it, I mean, you presented your thesis, your theory of the case, of course, to give the incoming Biden administration, if it's going to happen in January, a real headache. And it shows the power of the lobby. It shows the power of the Gulf countries and Saudi Arabia. Nonetheless, Iran is there and it will continue to be there, and its allies in the region are strong. The ties are strong here. What it is it the you know the when we look at the supporters of Trump, heralding peace in the Middle East and all of that. No, the attack on this assassination of this scientist here, and the quote unquote peace agreements that we saw with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. These are the forces to keep the United States inside the Middle East and to keep it focused on Iran. And unfortunately, there is an entire cottage industry in the foreign policy blob that their entire lifeblood is to target Iran and designated it as an aggressor. And that is a good line of business. It's a grift. And it certainly gives Israel the kind of leverage it has over the American foreign policy blob. And unfortunately, it doesn't really change anything on the ground. I mean, like I said, I'm not going to strenuously argue against anything you're saying, but given what Iran has had to go through over the last 40 years, it's going to find a way. And its relationship with other countries in the world, particularly China, in Russia, those are going to continue here. The assassination of the scientist is a good a top line story. Iran and the bomb. I mean, that always makes the headline here, and that's intentionally done here. But I don't think it's going to change Iran's behavior in dealing with the outside world, and maybe a kind of a lame rejoinder to what you just said about 2 assassinations within 1 year. Maybe it's an element of patience here. I agree. I mean, obviously, Iran has very limited cards to play. I mean, it lives in a very hostile environment, but it continues to prevail. And so we'll see what happens next. I mean, the big question is going to be, it's not really going to be about Iran. It's going to be about Iraq and Afghanistan. That's going to be the next pieces to be moved on the chess table here.
Right.
So, again,
I think, but that's
your central thesis in the very, very beginning is absolutely right. It's basically a reminder to whatever administration that's going to come to power in January. Israel and Saudi Arabia have sway, and pay attention.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And that's why, as you say, Iran has very limited cards to play. And I think this assassination shows it. I mean, Iran fumes and rages, but ultimately, it doesn't have a lot that it can do. It can attack Israel, but then that really threatens the United States coming in against it. It can attack Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. It can try to damage the oil industry in the Gulf, but that would also be a trigger. That could also trigger an American intervention. So therefore, again, and Iran doesn't want to get into a situation of escalating conflict with the United States, which it's bound to lose. So it really has very limited cards to play, and I think that's why this assassination is a humiliation. But also, and this is also very important, there have to be now questions about the competence of the Iranian government, because they can't just allow. I mean, can you imagine if this happened in Russia? Team of assassins entered Russia, killed some top military figure in Russia, and then they escaped. I mean, there would be huge number of questions asked. What the hell was the Kremlin?
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong.
Remember, a terrorist attack. Yeah, it's very hard to stop that. But this is a very carefully planned assassination. That took a lot of doing, a lot of organization, a lot of people had to be involved. So therefore, they know all the ins and outs and the workings of the Iranian security system. So therefore, Iran must be very, very lax in its security. And so there have to be real questions about the competence of the Iranian government.
Let's not get ahead of our skis here. I mean, we all know I think it's agreed the assassination happened. How it happened, I think that's one of the reasons why we don't know, because they're going to keep that close to their chest. Correct me if I'm wrong, George, but there are going to be elections in Iran on the first 2 months of next year. So I think that also plays into how Iran wants to deal with this. I mean, let's be very clear. I mean, we've made it very clear that obviously Iran cannot have a one-on-one conflict with the United States, military conflict with the United States. It's an impossible thing. A good part of Iran would be destroyed, and a good part of the Middle East would go down in flames as well, okay? Because that is the asymmetrical way that Iran defends itself
But it
from
also
the
means that Iran cannot also attack Israel or Saudi Arabia, because either attack on either brings in the United States, and the asymmetry is there that no one's going to come in on behalf of Iran. We're going to go to war on behalf of Iran, nor China. They'll help,
Well,
support,
okay.
they provide missile systems, they provide missiles, but they're not going to go to war. The United States would go to war on behalf of Saudi Arabia.
But let's take quite a few step backs and look what is the objective right here. It is regime change. That is what the ultimate objective is here. And the assassination of a top military anti-terrorist official, Soleimani, and then this Iranian scientist. That doesn't change the calculus. It's not moving regime change. As a matter of fact, what we're going to have is the typical thing. The hardliners, this is a long and tired scenario. The hardliners will come back and want more forceful reaction, but it will obviously be asymmetrical. It will be Iraq is the easiest target to wreak havoc here, where the Iraqi people want the United States to leave. So, I mean, when you're playing this kind of board game, the two different players may have different senses of what time is when you hit the clock. Okay, so I think there's going to be response.
Will ask. I mean, Iran committed itself not to develop nuclear weapons. I mean, that's been their doctrine. You kind of have to. Wouldn't the Iranian leaders say, "Well, really hasn't done us much good"?
You think it would do it much good if it did? I don't think it would significantly change the calculus.
No, well, then they would have to reconsider, was this such a great idea to give up our leverage that we would have had we developed a nuclear weapons program? Look at North Korea. North Korea has leverage. No one messes with North Korea. They have nuclear weapons. So the Iranian leaders would have to reconsider. Just
well, I mean,
a great idea.
You get into this
by losing our leverage.
But then you get into this perceptions dilemma, because if the Iran were to come out and say that they were going to develop these types of weapons, and then there would be a preemptive strike, and that would be an invitation for one too. So it's all about perceptions here.
So the answer is, of course, you don't come out and say it until you actually have it, and then you say, well, we have it now. What you going to
do? I personally, I mean, this is just a personal comment. I mean, I've known after the revolution in 1979, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Iranians moved to the United States. And one of their favorite places to go was Southern California, where I lived at the time. And unlike refugees that have come to America in the past, these people showed up with money, education, connections, okay? And I would say a very high culture, okay? My point in saying that is that you're not dealing with a third world country, if we can use an antiquated term. These are smart people, okay? Very smart. If they want a weapon like that, they can get it, okay? And I don't think it would be that hard for them, okay?
No, I don't think so. But they made a decision, a political decision, not to develop nuclear weapons. Therefore, they need now to think about that. Was this such a great decision? Was this strategically advantageous to Iran to give up on such a program? And I would think that they would reconsider and say, well, look, I mean, we haven't really got very much out of this.
But this is this.
Look at what other countries have done by developing them. Look at, North Korea.
Israel.
Exactly. So other countries developed it, and it's worked to their advantage. It's given them leverage. That's the way I would think the Iranian leaders would now be thinking.
But this is the insanity of this entire situation here, is that instead of working towards non-proliferation and disarmament, everything the West is doing, or the leaders in the West, when they look at Iran, are doing everything they can to destroy non-proliferation and disarmament. They're basically forcing a country to go and develop and acquire these weapons. It is insanity. It is insanity. And that's why I blame the Obama administration, not for the deal that they made with Tehran, but for not taking it further, okay? And it'll be one of diplomacy's greatest missed opportunities, absolutely missed opportunity.
Well,
it would have been a wonderful victory for disarmament and non-proliferation. And look where we are now.
Well, that's the thing. And that's why any attempt to coerce Iran into signing a deal that would be worse for Iran,
not possible,
worse than the JCPOA, is not on the table, because Iran's not going to sign an agreement worse than the JCPOA in the expectation that Trump comes back in 2024 and walks out of that agreement. I mean, what's the incentive? I mean, you can't sign a second agreement when the first agreement wasn't adhered to. So that's it. There's no incentive at all for Tehran to sign on.
No, George, the thing, going back to an asymmetrical response, that is obviously what the leadership in Tehran have been thinking about very, very deeply. And there's a lot of things to do. I mean, it's like tankers in the Gulf. I mean, what is happening here? This is a glorified game and dangerous game of chicken. I mean, so the assassination of this scientist, is that be enough for Iran to lash out and get some kind of compensation, okay, satisfaction? But the same thing, you could flip that, is that, another tanker hit a mine. Okay, so does Washington want to go to war with Iran over a tanker? See, they can do the same thing.
They would if Iran hit Saudi oil refineries and the entire Saudi oil industry ground to a halt, and they could identify Iran as the culprit. Yeah, the United States would go to war. I mean, that's an interesting scenario. That's an interesting scenario. I'm not exactly sure. No, look, George, we already saw, come on. We already saw an attack from Yemen into Saudi Arabia that just scared the living daylights out of the Gulf. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Given a clear warning, you do this again, and we're going to hit you. That was a clear warning, and then and I think Iran took it seriously. You notice they didn't respond like that after the assassination of Soleimani. They got the clear warning before that if they try this, essentially, which they can easily do, they can easily bring the Saudi oil industry to a halt. You try this, you got a serious war in your hands with the United States. And that's why they didn't respond like that over the Soleimani assassination. And I don't think they're going to
asymmetrical, my friend. Asymmetrical. Asymmetrical.
It's not if they think America's going to step in, and America will step in on behalf of Saudi. It's easy for the United States to do this. They can just simply lob missiles into Tehran. I mean, it's just not, it's asymmetrical in the sense that America is just so overwhelmingly powerful relative to Iran, and America.
Yeah, well, you lob one missile into Tehran, and the United Arab Emirates disappears. Think about it. Disappears.
Yes, of course. Iran is not going to want to escalate. They just will not escalate a war that Iran cannot win. I mean, it's nobody does this. Nobody does this.
But you always have to remember, what is the most important thing in the minds of the leadership in Tehran? What is it? It is the survival of the revolution. That's what motivates them.
Exactly.
That is their highest level concern. And if the revolution is threatened existentially, then they will do things. They will do things that people in Washington might think unthinkable, because they don't understand what the priorities of that leadership is.
No, they will not do anything that would cause enormous number of damage and casualties in Iran. And they know that the
United revolution is threatened, they will
easily cause absolute devastation in Iran. I mean, and therefore, that's why they're not going to do
George, we're turning this into a habit now, disagreeing with each other. I will reiterate, just for the record here, if the leadership in Tehran believes that their revolution is threaten
That's the
existentially.
country. You're talking about the country. They're not going to sit and preside.
They will do
their
what
country.
it takes to preserve it. Full stop.
Yes, which means that they will not allow their country.
I said revolution.
No,
I said revolution.
I absolutely
not their country.
no,
Revolution.
The revolution and the country, they go together, and they will not allow their country to be devastated by the United States. I mean, that's just they're just not going to do it. I mean, it's you know they're any leadership is responsible, and they know that getting into a conflict with the United States would be suicidal, and they're not going to do it. And that's why that's so limited.
They're still around, George. In our entire adult life, we've been hearing the end of the regime in Tehran. We've been hearing it ever since you and I were real young men, okay? Right. And they're still there. And you know what? And when you and I are very, very old, it's still going to be there.
Well, that's right. Well, they probably will be. And why will they be there? Because they are very prudent and do not get themselves into a direct confrontation with the United States. They can, shake their fist. They can threaten. They can call it the Great Satan. They're not going to get into anything. Start lobbing missiles at one another. It's just, they're not going to do it.
They're not the ones that are going to start it. Okay.
Well, yeah. Anyway, that's my view. Which is why. We saw what happened with Soleimani. That was a serious business. Soleimani was a national hero. He was assassinated, and Iran just basically sat on its hands. That was clearly a strategic decision by the Iranian leadership. We're not going to go down a path in which we get into a serious military confrontation with the United States.
Yeah, such irony abounds here is that killing Soleimani, the greatest terrorist hunter in modern time. Wow, the stupidity of it all, the stupidity of it. It really shows just how hollow and lack of intellectual fiber American foreign policy has. It just shows it's so vacuous.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we will maintain our laser-like focus on events in the Middle East, and as we maintain our laser-like focus on everything else. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.